The Vice President and Treasurer of the World Bank, Arunma Oteh, says 26% of the global GDP will come from the digital economy by the year 2020. CNBC Africa's Kenneth Igbomor discussed how Africa should be positioned for the opportunities in the digital economy. Take a look.
I really must commend the African Development Bank for selecting the topic of accelerating industrialization because where we are on the African continent, I do think that that needs to be the focus. I was particularly pleased to speak at the session on the digital economy because that's the way that we're going to accelerate industrialization on the African continent. By 2020, 26% of global GDP will come from the digital economy. We have a youthful population. Regional integration is absolutely essential. We need to democratize economic opportunities, and embracing the digital economy is really the way to go.
I would like to get your thoughts on how multilateral agencies like the World Bank and the African Development Bank can work together to lead this drive.
Oh, in several ways. We already have several examples of initiatives that we're supporting the African continent on. One that I really like is the Digital Identity Project, because digital identity is absolutely critical. Learning from India's experience with Aadhaar, which means foundation, and building a national identity system is absolutely essential because you basically bring people who had not been participating in the economy into the economy by giving them an identity. And that identity means you can offer them services, you can make payments to them, and you can build several other things on that. And so the bank is working, and I know that the African Development Bank is also involved in that project, on something for ECOWAS countries, for Benin, for Burkina Faso, for Cote d'Ivoire, for Niger. There's also a project that's been worked on with Nigeria. So that's important. There are a number of other projects. There's another project that I like very much, which is a project that we worked on in Zanzibar. That project is basically a project that used drones to try and improve the database on land. It's the first time in a very long time that Zanzibar can now collect property taxes because there's proper land registration, because land's been mapped. But the drone technology has also been used to try and identify pockets of where mosquitoes are. And therefore, there are also health possibilities. There's also, it can also be used for flood and rescue missions. And, you know, young people are learning in Zanzibar how to man drones, and the possibilities are enormous. We also have examples from Rwanda in the health sector. One area that's absolutely important is providing financing. It is an area where you need to complement the capital that's provided by the private sector with capital that's provided by governments. And so providing capital so that the capital is patient enough to support the ecosystem that would allow this sector to grow is absolutely important.
Yeah, because I was just going to take you up on the financing, and I'm thinking, you know, what innovative model? Do we create new models of financing, or do we stick to the traditional means? You know, I'd like to get your thought on that as well.
I think financing has to be innovative. I think it's a pity that last year that only about $200 million funded startups on the continent of Africa. There are several examples around the world. Israel has been very particular about supporting investments in startups, and today provides 30 times more investment dollars per person than even Europeans provide for startups. The second is that you do need capital that is focused on innovation to be patient. And so long-term capital is important. Governments having various initiatives that support young people, where they're being provided capital to support them, but that capital also goes with mentorship and skills, is extremely important. Finding other ways to provide financing to their initiatives is also extremely important. So large companies can work with young entrepreneurs, youth, to support them in providing the cash flow that they need earlier on. They can participate in government projects as a way to provide them financing so that they don't die before they even start.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because I can imagine that, because I'm looking at trying to build an ecosystem. I'm looking at how all the key actors interplay, from governments to private sector to DFIs to you have capital markets as well. I'd like you to speak to that.
Well, I have very strong views about the ecosystem. I do think that given the importance of the digital economy to transform a nation, you have to have leadership from the top. You have to have political will, and that leader must define what that ecosystem is, and that ecosystem has a capital component. And of course, given my affinity to the capital markets, we need to make sure that the ecosystem is such that you're not just building startups, you're building companies that will endure. And that the capital markets are supportive of them so that they can actually come to market and be listed on the exchanges at some point in time. But in addition to capital, you need to focus on skills. If we're not focused as Africa on STEM, on science, technology, engineering and maths, we're not going to have the backbone that supports innovation, the backbone that supports the digital economy. You also need to support the innovation hubs around Africa. There are at least 2,500 of them. You need to make sure that the kind of training that young people are getting, in addition to STEM, is also training that have them be people who create jobs rather than people who just come out and are looking for the next job. So entrepreneurial skills, problem-solving skills, creativity is extremely important. The other thing that's absolutely essential is to make sure that the government is investing in infrastructure. If you're not going to have broadband access, then there's you don't have enough of it available so that young people can create. So I like what South Africa is doing with their broadband strategic plan, where they've announced that by 2020 they would like 90% of their population to have access to the internet. If you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult. The other thing is really to promote a lot of the newer technologies. What we've seen is that cloud computing has been a game changer because it's made servers more agile, it's made it more efficient, and it's provided storage or in computing as a utility that can be used more flexibly. So allowing us on the continent to think more creatively about how we can resolve our own issues is also part of that ecosystem.
So looking at that ecosystem and looking at how it is evolving globally, you know, we're seeing a lot of disruption happening, especially in the financial services space. You know, with the blockchain technology coming up, cryptocurrencies, regulators not knowing how to handle this. I would like you to know how we should deal with this, looking at the drive for getting efficiency versus the risk.
Okay. So I think that it's an extremely important point, because you do need a mindset. And for me, the mindset has to be that that it is an opportunity and not a challenge. And so when you look at more recently what's been happening with blockchain and cryptocurrencies, I think that regulators have focused a lot on some of the challenges of people speculating about cryptocurrency. I think people should also focus on the benefits of the underlying technology of blockchain, which is a decentralized distributed ledger, which allows you to store information more easily, builds trust. And so if you think of trade finance, it lends itself to trade finance and can reduce the bulk of paper that you still have to deal with trade finance. Also important for property rights and property and land registration. So there are sectors that are absolutely important. And what's great for us on the African continent is that we literally can leapfrog because we don't have the legacy systems. So I'm not saying that some of these technologies don't have their risks, but it's to have the mindset about how can I make it work? How can I create an environment that is supportive of them evolving in the right way?
But when I look at the regulatory environment across Africa, you know, my biggest worry is that do they have the capacity to deal with the pace of change? Are they structured in a way to change with the times?
I think your concern is a valid one, but I don't think it's restricted to the African continent. I think that, I mean, if you ask most people, people are not sure where disruptive technology will take us. But there's a lot of learning in embracing disruptive technology. So the approach is not to prevent things from happening, which is almost impossible because the world is borderless, given the way that disruptive technology works. But it's to make sure that you're engaging with all stakeholders, that you're investing more specifically in understanding the risks.
More like finding a balance somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That was CNBC Africa's Kenneth Igbomor in conversation with Arunma Oteh, VP and Treasurer at the World Bank Group.